The oceans are essential for life. They help us regulate our climate, they provide us with food and many of the other services that are essential for our well-being.
Ocean science is making a contribution to in-country dialogues, particularly those related to the blue economy and the achievement of SDG 14 targets.
This knowledge is more than a matter of curiosity. Our very survival may hinge upon it.
Global Ocean Science Report assesses for the first time the status and trends in research capacity around the world. The second edition of Global Ocean Science Report includes new measures, updated information, and new countries provided data and input to the report.
En el Global Ocean Science Report se puede encontrar información muy estructurada, muy bien obtenida, muy rigurosa, que puede ayudar no solo a los científicos, sino a los políticos y a los tomadores de decisiones a entender quién hace cada cosa, qué productos se obtienen, qué recursos se consumen, etcétera, etcétera.
This report, like its predecessor, continues to underscore the uneven distribution and allocation of funding for ocean science within and among regions and countries.
International collaboration is very important in ocean sciences, also as compared to other science domains. The more international collaboration we see in publications, the more the citation rates of the papers increase.
Nous sommes à un moment clé pour gérer au mieux les bouleversements liés à notre environnement, à la biodiversité et aux transformations de nos économies. La science et les océans ont un rôle clé à jouer.
La enorme demanda de datos e información oceánica en todos los sectores, el ambiental, el científico, el socioeconómico, el ámbito académico, privado y público, requiere un gran compromiso de todos los países en generar y mantener la infraestructura de investigación en ciencias oceánicas.
IOC ユネスコは国際協力の最も重要な場の一つとして今後の役割が期待されると思います。
UN 해양과학 10년 프로그램이 시작되는 2021년 바로 직전에 GOSR 2020이 발간된 것은 그 의미가 크다고 할 것입니다.
There is so much in there to put you on track for the science we need for the ocean we want.
Happy World Ocean Day 2021 to all of you. My name is Salvatore Arrico. I'm the head of ocean science at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. Welcome to today's webinar. Let me start with some housekeeping guidance. First of all, please note that this webinar is being recorded. Simultaneous translation is available in 4 languages. You may click on the globe and select your channel, English, French, Russian, or Spanish. Kindly note that you can also choose off if you prefer to listen to the flow. And make sure your name is clearly entered, so when you ask questions, we know who you are, and that you identify a panelist to whom you want the question to be directed. To ask questions, please use the Q&A section, not the chat. Kindly use the chat only for technical matters. I think we can begin now. I'd like to say that I'm very excited to be with all of you today for this webinar that will be focusing on the highlights of the Global Ocean Science Report 2020 and the implications of its findings for the transfer of marine technology. Today we have with us an impressive panel. They come from different regions, different backgrounds, but they are all very keen to operationalize these notions of ocean science capacity and the transfer of marine technology. We have with us Jacqueline Uku, Yames, and they will start with the first presentation. Jacqueline is the coordinator. First of all, she's here in her capacity as co-chair of the Global Ocean Science Report, and she's coordinator of research at the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. And she's also president of the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, WIOMSA. Thank you for being here with us today, Jacqueline. And she will share this initial presentation with Yames. Yames is the director of the Flanders Marine Institute in Belgium, and also co-chair together with Jacqueline of the Global Ocean Science Report 2020. So with further ado, we can proceed with the presentation by Jacqueline and Jan. Thank you.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'll be taking us through the first part of the report. It was an honor for me to co-chair this process with Jan Mays, and we found very, very interesting findings that would advise and propel us forward as we look at ocean science beyond 2020. So we can have the next slide. This report was a global endeavor, and for me, coming from Africa, it was indeed an honor. We had 45 member states who answered our questionnaires. We did a questionnaire survey, bibliometric and technometric and gender-specific analysis. Our editorial board, which Jan and myself chaired, were made out of 12 members, 5 female, 7 male. We led a team of 35 authors, experts from all 5 IOC electoral groups, and we had many reviewers who provided feedback on our chapters, and we are indeed grateful to each one of them for their contribution. Next slide. The document may seem large to us when we tell you it's 250 pages, but it is a very valuable resource for policymakers, academics, and other stakeholders who seek to assess progress that we are making towards the UN Sustainable Goals and the UN 2030 agenda. And we also have an executive summary, which is much shorter and highlights our key findings and main conclusions in all UNESCO languages. And the report can be accessed at the portal that is provided there below. Next slide. I'll just take a moment to share the top findings of our report. And we found that ocean science is very, very important, and it has implications for sustainable development policies and management strategies and action plans in multiple sectors. The other finding was that we do not fund ocean science enough. Funding is very inadequate, and this undermines the ability of ocean science to support sustainable provision of ocean ecosystem services to us as human beings. We looked at gender issues and found that women were underrepresented, especially in the high technical categories. And looking at the young ocean scientists, we found different levels of support amongst countries. As I mentioned before, technical capacity, technical work remains unequally distributed among countries and regions, and this imbalance is propelled a lot by short-term or ad hoc funding for ocean science. Looking at publications worldwide, this continues to increase, especially through partnerships, and this is very true for Eastern and Southeastern Asia. In terms of data and information, we found countries are inadequately equipped to handle their data, share it, and even provide access and share it. We're very glad because this process offered us a systematic approach to measure ocean science capacity internationally, and it's very closely linked to SDG 14 targets, 14.8 targets. Thank you. Next slide. When we looked at human capacity, we found that national numbers of ocean science researchers vary. We have from 1 to 300 employees per million inhabitants. And these ratios, initially we thought these ratios were linked directly to GDP, but we found that they were not related, and the data can be found within the report, with countries having a larger number, certain countries having a larger number of researchers that are working in ocean science, and the number dwindling as you move towards the less developed countries of the world. Next slide. I mentioned before a bit about gender equity, and when we delved deeper, we found that we are far from reaching and achieving gender equality. Female researchers account for 39% of global ocean scientists, but we were also surprised to find that this is 10% higher than the share of female researchers in natural sciences. So this is something we should actually celebrate, that we have a few more women in ocean sciences and are choosing ocean sciences. We looked at participants in conferences, and we found that female ocean scientists are talking to the world more and more. Females account for 29 to 53% of total conference participants, depending on the ocean science category and the region. But one interesting finding was the fact that we still have very few women giving keynote presentations, and this is something that we need to work on as a global science community, as we host symposium and workshops, to be able to push and enhance gender equality and engagement of women. So I'll hand over to my co-chair, Jan Meijs, to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uku, Jacqueline. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Also on my behalf, I wish all the ocean people attending this webinar a very happy World Ocean Day. I will continue with some of the key findings of the Global Ocean Science Report 2020. I'll start with the bibliometric analysis that was done. We'll look at the output of the marines of ocean sciences and also at international collaboration. On the left side, you can see in this graph that global ocean science outputs have been on the rise continuously for a 20-year period. We have a nice time series with the Global Ocean Science Report spanning almost 20 years for this data. You can see that the number of publications on ocean science almost tripled in that period, from close to 40,000 to close to 120,000. Not only did the number of publications rise, but also the number of journals in which ocean science papers find a place are published. Looking at international collaboration, we looked at the international co-publication rate, an index that measures basically the number of countries from which the different co-authors on a specific paper are working. And you can see that there, if we compare in light blue in the center graph, the period 2000-2005 to the gray bars, 2012 to 2017, you can see that this index increases. That means that international partnerships are on the rise, and that competitive ocean science is driven actually by international partnerships. And that's not only a qualitative issue, but also not only quantitative, but also qualitative. The graph on your right-hand side shows the correlation between this international co-publication rate and the average impact factor of the journals in which the research is published. And there you can see that there's a positive correlation there. So the more international the paper is, the more likely it is to be published in a higher impact journal. Next slide, please. Not only did we analyze the scientific output in terms of scientific publications, but we also looked for the first time in this edition of the Global Ocean Science Report at patents, technometric analysis for the period 2000 to 2018. We looked at the way ocean science findings are converted into applications for society through analysis of the cooperative patent classification. This is data taken from the US, from Europe, from the Korean Intellectual Property Office, also Japan and China. You can see that there are quite a few patents that are derived from ocean science. Most of these are in the family of technologies or applications for mitigation or adaptation against climate change. So showing the relevance of our sciences for the climate issues that we have at hand. And also the other large bar on second place there is everything that's to do with navigation, ships, waterborne vessels and related equipment. But the diversity is quite high, and we have the impression that this diversity is increasing over time, but that's something that we will only be able to assess in the next edition, of course. Next, please. With regard to marine technology, and as exemplified here by an analysis of the global ocean research fleets, we can see that there is an inequality, and the research, the access to technical infrastructure that is required, that is essential for ocean science, remains unequally distributed over the globe. The central circle represents the total number of research vessels that we have identified, close to 1,000. You can see that half of these are quite small. They are smaller than 10 meters. Another quarter are local coastal vessels between 10 and 35 meters. And then the last quarter are the truly larger vessels that operate at a regional scale, an international scale, or a really global scale. That's a limited capacity all by all. And on the right-hand side, you can see that half of this global research fleet is actually managed by the USA and Japan. And that means that other parts of the world, other countries have lesser availability and accessibility to the research fleet that is operating in our world ocean. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we look at the investments. We asked our member states about their investments in ocean science. And there are really large differences between countries. I present two graphs here. The left one is the ocean science expenditure as a percentage of the gross domestic expenditure on research and development. And the graph on the right is the gross domestic expenditure on research and development as a percentage of the GDP of a country. You can see that the differences are quite large. As a percentage of GDP, you see that there are quite a few countries that reach the mythical 3% goal, and then only just, while the Republic of Korea exceeds that and approaches 4.5 to 5%. And if you then look at the percentage of that global investment in research and development, you extract that part that is spent on ocean research, you see that only 1.7% of national research budgets on average are allocated for ocean science. And percentages vary between 0.03% to close to 12% in the case of Peru. But it is, we want to stress here that this is a very small proportion if you compare it to the value of the global blue economy. Then you have good arguments with these figures presented in the Global Ocean Science Report to ask for a budget increase in ocean science from governments and the private sector. Next, please. Before the summary, last slide on the ocean science supporting sustainable development. We asked our member states whether they organize ocean science in support of sustainable development and sustainable management of ocean resources. And surprisingly, many countries lack a specific strategy to measure progress towards the achievement of our SDG, SDG 14. From all the countries that responded, we're only 37, we need more data here. But of these countries that responded, more than 70% indicated they have strategies and a roadmap to achieve the goals of the 2030 agenda. But only 20%, 21% have a specific strategy focusing on the ocean, on SDG 14. So that's an area where we feel we can make a lot of progress. And the next slide, please. In conclusion, if you can, yeah, thank you. We end the Global Ocean Science Report 2020 with a call for actions, actions to be taken by the member states, by governments, by the scientists, by other stakeholders, NGOs, civil society, and the likes. We know that the Global Ocean Science Report now, with high quality and confidence, assess the state of ocean science. And we know that we are in a process towards producing newer editions as the years progress of this report. And building on this baseline that we have now, we want to look at these 9 action points basically in the next edition. We call for an enhancement of the current level of funding for ocean science. That's a very important one. going from the one but last slide that I showed you. We think that's important that our member states establish good procedures for continuous collection of comparable data on the investments in ocean science. It has been quite a struggle for our member states to gather these data from diverse sources. And we think that the Global Ocean Science Report can also be a tool that facilitates setting up procedures so that reporting becomes better, data become better, and comparability of data becomes more robust in the future. We call to facilitate co-design of ocean science. We think it's important to involve both the producers and the end users of ocean science information there. And we want to promote multi-stakeholder partnerships in ocean science. It's probably the only way in which we can operationalize the transfer of marine technology that is very much needed. Fifth call to action is to move towards ocean science capacity development with equal participation of all countries, genders, ages, and embracing local and indigenous knowledge. Leaving no one behind is very important. It's a challenge, but is also in a multilateral context quite feasible, we believe. We should develop strategies and implementation plans to support the career needs of women and young scientists in this context. There's still a lot of work to be done there, as Jacqueline pointed out to you. Open science principles are very important. There are still a lot of barriers for open access to ocean data that we should consider to be a common good for humanity. And we want to see these barriers removed. We'll have to find solutions to make that happen. IOC has an important role to play there, I think, with its IOD program. We should foster education and training in professionals related to ocean sciences. We will need a lot of talent in the next decades, a lot of good people trained in many different disciplines. And then finally, a very specific recommendation, a call to action, is to look at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on not only human, but also technical capacity in ocean science, funding, sustained funding. We know that the current Global Ocean Science Report 2020 is a pre-COVID-19 assessment, state of the art. We have the opportunity to redo some measurements quite early in the process of working towards the next edition that is likely to be published somewhere in the middle of the ocean decade. So we think it's important that we pay specific attention to the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic is having or has had on our science, the funding of the science, the human and the technical capacities. And the final slide before I hand over back to the chair just reminds you of the websites, the UNESCO website, IOC website, but also the Global Ocean Science Report portal. There you can find the full report in English, the executive summary in the 6 languages, and all the underlying data are freely available there. So you can play around with these and make your own graphs and analysis that are not included in the main report that is ultimately a summary of a lot of interesting data. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Jacqueline, for the first part of the presentation. And I hand back to the chair, Salvatore.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline and Jan. This is a very ambitious endeavor, requiring a lot of efforts by many people. The report is a few hundred page report, and yet you have been able to really provide a very efficient and clear synthesis of its findings. And it is against that basis that I would like to invite the next speaker, Paula Cristina Sierra Correa. Paula is the head of Marine and Coastal Research and Information at Mare in Colombia, and she is also a member of the Global Ocean Science Report 2020 editorial board, and she will sort of take us onto a more operational level in terms of how some of the findings in the Global Ocean Science Report can really be applied. Specifically, she will present on a clearinghouse mechanism to facilitate the transfer of marine technology in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. Paula, over to you.
Happy World Ocean Day. It is a pleasure for me to be part of this panel. Today, I will be sharing with you the experience, as Salvatore said, on the facilitation mechanism for the access to the information of oceans in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is an example in the region on how we have made the data available, how we have enabled the transfer of marine technology, and how we have helped the member states to work in favor of the Global Ocean Science Report. Next, please. In the case of the transfer of marine technology, we are basically referring to the report that was published by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission in 2005, and we include here information and data in different formats that can be made available, manuals, different criteria, standards, equipment, all types of information related to the marine and coastal topics, facilities, vessels, machine capacity to work on data, and the scientific knowledge, the methodologies, and the policies for the use of this information. Next. Along these lines, then, we ask ourselves, why a facilitation mechanism? So this has to do with being able to make available the information. Much of this information is solely in the hands of the researchers or in scientific publications. We would like this information to reach the decision-making levels too. Next. And along these lines, the facilitation mechanism helps us greatly to provide the stakeholders from member states to have direct and rapid access to the relevant sources of information and to facilitate the scientific, technical, and financial cooperation in an efficient manner, to use the resources that are scanty, to use them efficiently, to work in oceanographic research, to become the main repository of information, to back up the reports before the conventions on biodiversity, climate change, and the multiple conventions that we have, including CONVEMAR, and to provide a platform whereby we can share not only the data, but also the information on the researchers, and to create important partnerships for the growth of the transfer of marine technologies under this aforementioned concepts, and to reach a transparent ocean with open access to data, information, and the technologies we currently use in the region, making it available to this decade, the decade of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, 2021-2030. And we have developed a prototype facilitation mechanism for the region. This prototype has a flexible architecture and includes 7 thematic modules. These 7 thematic modules can be seen right now on the screen. Basically, they deal with the documentary parts, the vessels in the region, everything that has to do with the scientific, with the data on the scientists working in the area. You can also find the website in the lower part of the screen that you can browse through. And we tried to undertake an analysis to be included within the Global Ocean Science Report. And we can see here many of these data. We have currently 24 countries in the region that are sending and reporting on information, offering different types of information depending on the area, Latin America, North America, and the Caribbean. And we also have countries contributing in a greater or lesser manner. And we work in training and education opportunities offered to us by the OTGA, the Ocean Teachers Global Academy, working on the oceans. And that we also find in this facilitation mechanism. We have the training opportunities that we offer to the entire region. Today, this facilitation mechanism has become a worldwide pilot for the information system on oceans of the decade. And we are very proud to know that in the Latin American region, we have made this contribution. And basically, the way the system was structured in its architecture has helped us visualize how we are going to structure the Ocean Info Hub, or OIH for its English acronym. So this Ocean Info Hub compiles these characteristics and features: the thematic search, and that can be explored, the modules, the detailed list of information, different filters for the internet search. We have interfaces in different languages for the region: English, French, and Spanish. We have also web scraping technology, which is an innovation that looks into different websites and uses the information, the data, and makes analysis in a swift way about the information that can be found in the different websites, and provide different services that can be interoperable, that can be consulted. So this has been possible because of the collaboration between the different regions in the planet. Next. And the topics I commented on, we have the lists of experts, the documents on marine and coastal information, the training, the existing laboratories in the region, their capacities, the institutions that are currently working on these topics, the geospatial information, the mapping that also poses one of the greatest challenges of the decade, and everything about the vessels and the capacities of the vessels. So we are currently transferring all this to different regions, as we can see it here in the map, from Latin America to Africa, Asia, and other regions, and hoping, as Jan said in his previous presentation, hoping that this may contribute to the Global Ocean Science Report in its forthcoming phase. And lastly, to acknowledge the government of Flanders, and of course the IODE, which is the information and technical branch of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. And we will keep on making headway in these topics so that we may contribute from our region to the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paula, for this presentation, and we'll come back to it as well as to the previous one and to all the presentations during the questions and answers session. At this stage, I would like to move on and introduce our next speaker, Tamara Thomas, who will present on the importance of the transfer of marine technology in the conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity beyond the national jurisdiction, a very practical application of the notion of TMT, the transfer of marine technology. Let me just add that Tamara is the director of the International Ocean Policy, Global Policy and Government Relations at Conservation International. Tamara, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. Awesome. So here I was just reiterating that in the previous presentation, we heard about the vital importance of the transfer of marine technology within national jurisdiction, and where Paula focused on Latin American and Caribbean region, and specifically focused on the importance of a clearinghouse mechanism. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into beyond national jurisdiction, into the high seas. So like Paula mentioned, marine technology transfer via a clearinghouse mechanism is also of utmost importance to the areas beyond national jurisdiction as well. But before we get to that, we're just going to give a little bit of context setting. So the BBNJ agreement, also referred to as ABNG, meaning areas beyond national jurisdiction, It's also referred to as the New Implementing Agreement and also the High Seas Treaty. So this BBNJ agreement is currently being negotiated and will be an implementing agreement under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, commonly known as UNCLOS. These negotiations are taking place currently under the able guidance of the Secretariat of DOALOS, the Division of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea. So, like the Fish Stocks Agreement, the BBNJ agreement will live under the umbrella of the agreement of UNCLOS as well as the principles of UNCLOS. The transfer of marine next slide, please. The transfer of marine technology is important, as previously noted by Paula and those before her. Clearinghouse mechanism is one of the main elements that will be important for these negotiations within the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So just as a little bit of background, this BBNJ agreement that is currently being negotiated started with a series of working groups that turned into preparatory meetings, of which there were 4. There were also a division of elements that arose through these preparatory meetings that we will touch on in a few. There was a call for an IGC by a number of countries in the United Nations. So there was an IGC 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, sorry, there's IGC 1, 2, and 3. IGC 4 has been postponed and it was supposed to take place, it was supposed to be postponed until this August. And currently it's going to be postponed again until next year. And so many of us are looking forward to the conclusion of these negotiations. And so next slide, please. So this is sort of what the road to an international legally binding instrument to conserve and sustainably use marine biological diversity in the areas beyond national jurisdiction currently looks like. So it's been a long road, as you can see, and within each of these bubbles that you can see on the screen, the importance of the transfer of marine technology has definitely played an important role. So we can move on to the next slide. So here is where I want to talk about the package agreement that was agreed to. So within the 4 elements of the treaty, capacity building and technology transfer plays a vital role, as stated. So within this agreement, no one section could be negotiated alone. It must be negotiated as a package. And so as we think about the transfer of marine technology, we need to think about the transfer of marine technology through the lens of marine genetic resources, through the lens of environmental impact assessments, and also through the lens of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. This is the combination between standing up marine protected areas and capacity building, as well as marine technology transfer, is of utmost importance to ensure that this negotiation process concludes with an agreement that will ensure the sustainable use and the conservation of the marine biological diversity in the high seas. And so the important aspects, capacity building includes, among others, human capacity, technology, and data management, among others. Going from Latin America and Caribbean regional context to this global scale of ABNJ, we recognize that there are many gaps that exist. Some needs, such as a clearinghouse mechanism, are similar to that added to the opportunity for the world to figure out how to scale up solutions that meet this scaled up global need. These gaps and needs include development needs, and the successful implementation of transfer of marine technology will subsequently contribute to the successful implementation of an international agreement. Capacity building guidelines were developed by the IOC, and it encompasses more than technology. It's also science, knowledge, and its capacity building beyond only science and knowledge. As mentioned previously, the call for co-designing ocean science is equally mirrored in a call for co-designing area-based management tools, including marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We have to consider how this capacity building and technology transfer will be fostered throughout the decade of ocean science. We see an advancement and development there is a need, and there is a need to have monitoring and evaluation framework as will be presented right after myself. Within area-based management, within EBNG, there is a need to ensure transfer of marine technology as it relates to monitoring and evaluation as well. So on the next slide, we'll see, there is a question. What exactly does transfer of marine technology mean, and what are the current issues around transfer of marine technology in BBNG? Capacity building and transfer of marine technology within the context of the implementing agreement should serve to advance science and innovation in developing countries. Various types of capacity building, ranging from general education and institutional capacity to more specific training related to genetic resources would be needed. Programs to allow researchers to be active participants, not only in cruises, but also within laboratory techniques, and also importantly, in a manner that places developing countries on an equal footing as those in developed countries. Access to ex situ resources, data, and technology is also of vital importance. The transfer of knowledge through an innovative funding mechanisms, scholarships, and work abroad training is also of utmost importance. Next slide, and I'll quickly wrap up. We can go to the next slide. And so I just wanted to end by noting that capacity building programs can be more targeted within this international context, making them more implementable by developing countries that are facing economic challenges. And just to note here that transfer of marine technology in BBNG is important not only for developing countries, but also for developed countries. In order for this BBNG treaty to be implemented and for its implementation to be successful, we definitely need the cooperation of all parties to this agreement to ensure the successful transfer of marine technology. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Tamara. And with that, I would like to invite last speaker for today, and certainly not the least, Alison Clausen. She is a member of the IOC Secretariat and also of the Decade Coordination Unit, the unit hosted by the IOC Secretariat in charge of coordinating the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. The decade just took off, and Alison will tell us about the implementation plan of the Ocean Decade and progress with regard to the development of a monitoring and evaluation framework for the decade. Alison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Salvatore, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone, and happy World Oceans Day. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I do want to start off with very quickly just to give you a reminder of why we're even here talking about an ocean decade. I won't go into a lot of detail because I'm sure many of you are familiar about this. But as a reminder, the ocean decade really was born out of the idea that there was a growing recognition of the need for improved ocean knowledge to underpin numerous facets of the 2030 agenda and other policy frameworks at the global and regional level, including the BBNJ framework that we've just heard about. And it was also born out of the need really identified through GOSR and other analyses that there needs to be a global framework to reduce inequalities in doing ocean science and in the ability to access and use ocean science. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This next slide tries to give you very much in a nutshell everything that you need to know about the Ocean Decade at a first glance. So you'll see here in the top left-hand corner the vision and mission statement of the decade, and these two really focus on the transformative nature of the decade, We really want the decade to inspire, catalyze new partnerships that will move beyond business as usual and that will really lead to co-design between generators of knowledge and users of knowledge, and that will also take ocean science in its broadest sense, so incorporating Indigenous and local knowledge, as well, of course, as capacity development, transfer of marine technology, access to data, etc. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the Decade Action Framework, which sets out, hopefully by now, some terminology that many of you are familiar with. So the Decade Actions, which are really the tangible programs and projects that partners all around the world will put into implementation over the decade. And today is a really big day, a big milestone in this respect, because we have literally just announced the first set of endorsed Decade Actions. And I can put the link to that announcement in the chat afterwards, but it's obviously a milestone to have the first endorsed actions. All of these actions will contribute to the decade objectives and to 10 Ocean Decade challenges, which really are the most immediate and pressing needs for ocean science throughout the decade. And this will, of course, contribute to the Ocean Decade outcomes and to the 2030 agenda and other frameworks. Now, all of this is going to be undertaken by a very diverse and vast group of stakeholders who need to be able to work together. Well, first of all, they need to be able to find each other, create collaboration, create synergies, develop new partnerships. And so we'll be progressively rolling out through the year the Global Stakeholder Forum, which will be a fairly substantial online community platform for different communities of practice that will come together through the decade to inspire new decade actions that can then contribute to the Ocean Decade challenges. We can move to the next slide, please. So what I really wanted to get into the meat of the presentation was about measuring progress through the decade. Now, why is this so important? Well, it's very important that we can track progress throughout the decade, because the decade is, it's 10 years, it's a long time. We are going to need to have adaptive management. We're going to need to be able to respond to trends that we're seeing, to new circumstances that arrive. And for that, we're going to need data. We're going to need to revise priorities. We're going to need to target new areas of activity throughout the decade. So we have an informal working group on monitoring and evaluation that has put together a first concept note on the monitoring and evaluation framework for the decade. And this was presented to a meeting of the Interim Decade Advisory Board a month or so ago. And it's really a framework that aims to be based, or is based on several principles. It's simple, adaptable, it's optimized, and I'd like to really point out what we mean there. That means that we're looking to really avoid duplication in existing processes, whether existing indicators, whether existing methods, etc. And this, of course, includes the Global Ocean Science Report, which we see as a fundamental part of the monitoring and evaluation framework for the decade, both acting as a baseline in its 2020 version and as a tool for measuring progress throughout the remainder of the decade. It needs also to be a monitoring and evaluation framework that's standardized, impact-driven, inclusive, and open. And some of that comes back to this idea of including Indigenous and local knowledge systems and having fair, accessible, interoperable and reusable data sources, all principles which are obviously shared with the Global Ocean Science Report. We can move to the next slide, please. So this figure, I'm sorry if the text is a little bit small, but this sort of tries to capture in a nutshell the main components of the conceptual framework for monitoring and evaluation. And essentially the system aims to really operate at 3 different levels. So in the middle, the yellow, green and blue boxes in the middle, we're really looking at how can we be measuring at the impact and outcome level of the decade. And this is really a mix of quantitative and qualitative indicators. Not all of them are attributable 100% to the decade, but there'll be some narratives and storylines and different ways of measuring some of these indicators. Obviously, significant overlap with other indicators, for example, through the 2030 agenda and other global and regional frameworks. On the very far right-hand side, the sort of orange-colored blob, is the more operational level monitoring and evaluation we want to undertake. And this is probably the simplest part of the framework, where we're looking really at some of the nuts and bolts figures about decade actions. And then on the left-hand side, very important that we're measuring the enabling environment. So looking at how capacity is changing, how engagement is changing, how resource mobilization is changing, how access to technology is changing. And that's where we'll be looking for some very strong linkages with the Global Ocean Science Report in terms of indicators and methods and so forth. If we can move on to the last slide, please. So just briefly, some next steps in the monitoring and evaluation. As I said, there has been a concept note that has been prepared by the informal working group for monitoring and evaluation. This will be built out over the next few months to a more detailed discussion paper. There will be an inventory of existing indicators at each level of the framework to really try and find those synergies and look at the indicators and methods that already exist that we can use. And then we'll be looking to really build out the system, including resourcing and training needs for the rollout of the M&E framework. And that could include, we hope, some links to some of the processes under the Global Ocean Science Report. And then, of course, we'll be working with the proponents of decade actions as well as other structures and groups within the Ocean Decade to really pilot, refine, and finally operationalize the M&E framework, ideally to have something fairly functional before the end of the year. And with that, I will leave it because I know we're running short on time, but thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Alison. And I would like to invite all panelists to open up their cameras, please. Alison, Jacqueline, Paula, Tamara, Jan. We are missing Jan, but hopefully he'll be with us in a second. And because yes, the time is short, but we should indeed take a few minutes to sort of come back to some key issues. And if you allow me, I think we hold a wonderful narrative here because we have a strong baseline which points to some key inequalities, and then we, at the other extreme, that is to say, the decade which is before us, we also have the opportunity to really take science out of its sort of a box and have it help society really reach the capacity that is needed for science to act in a transformative way and really help walk the talk on the 2030 agenda and beyond. And in the middle, we have issues which are, sort of a technical, entail some technical difficulties, the clearinghouse mechanism, but also, a policy framework or policy frameworks with which we have to come to terms. So a couple of questions for all of you, and I hope you can address those questions in 1 minute. Perhaps starting with Jan and Jacqueline, it's up to you how you want to go about it. It seems to me that in some respects, ocean science remains a prerogative of a lucky few. There are efforts which are decoupled from the GDP. So countries which are still, developing countries that are really investing in ocean science. But how do you see, Jacqueline and Jan, current gaps be filled? Do you see that as a technical challenge related to training, education, or as a political one, or a bit of both? Jacqueline, you may wish to go ahead.
Yeah, yes, I may. Thank you for the question, Salvatore. It's an interesting thing to see these challenges, and especially to see them documented so clearly in the data assessment that we did for the Global Ocean Science Report. Some things that stand out for me in Africa, especially with the finding that we rely very much on technical support and also financing that is short-term, project-based. So we do good projects for 3-4 years, we shut them down and people are left wondering what happened because we are not sustaining that effort. And for Africa, I still come back and I look at opportunities to tap into philanthropy, even within our context, opportunities to enhance ocean literacy, so that those that we want to reach out to understand what we're talking about. So I think it's two-pronged. Looking for finance has to go alongside education, making sure that that is a package that educates people, financiers, and can put something on the table for sustained interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So this continuum of action, so which very much reflects a value chain approach, also speaks to the question of multi-stakeholder involvement. So, Alison, this seems absolutely central to the decade compared to other more conventional ocean science initiatives that have been sort of carried out in the past. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about those notions of co-design, co-production, co-development of solutions, and really the multi-stakeholder nature of the decade, please?
Yeah, thanks, Salvatore. And you're right, this is one of the essential underlying principles of the decade, and we're really trying to highlight the need for decade actions in particular to be based on co-design. And in very simple terms, the message we're trying to pass is that we want, or really would like to see, decade actions that are developed jointly by both those who are generating the science and generating the knowledge and those who are going to use the science at the end. So that might be a policymaker, it might be industry, it may be a protected area manager, but really finding those partnerships that don't always exist now and getting people to work together right from the start of defining the research questions and the expected outcomes. And it's one of the key criteria by which the Interim Decade Advisory Board has been making recommendations about endorsement of decade actions. We understand that it's very new for some people, and so we'll also be rolling out some training courses this year on how co-design can work within the Ocean Decade, and there'll be a publication released very soon based on a series of webinars last year that really tried to draw some lessons, very practical and tangible lessons from different regions around the world about the conditions for success of co-design. So stay tuned for those publications.
Thank you. And I think, and this is not in the interest of time, that what Alison said really responds nicely to a question that we got really on the importance of education, but also of linking science with society. Tamara, you spoke about a process which is about biodiversity, which is about conservation, which is about multiple uses, ocean sustainability. But the political dimension of that process, the areas beyond national jurisdiction, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction negotiations seems to be very significant. Are you hopeful that we will be able to matchmake really the lessons that ocean science is bringing forward in terms of addressing societal challenges with those political discourse?
Thanks, Salvatore. Yes, I definitely think there is a way for us to match what's coming out through the Decade of Ocean Science and what is needed within the BBNJ agreement. Hopefully within this decade, we will have a concluded BBNJ agreement. And the transfer of marine technology is going to be, as I said, really important for upstanding this BBNJ agreement. I think of importance also will be to make sure that capacity building and marine technology transfer meshes in a way that enables developing countries to be at the negotiating table beyond the actual implementation of the treaty, so that developing countries are on the same footing as developed countries in terms of making decisions on what happens within this area beyond national jurisdiction. And this includes, of course, and I know this was also on one of Alison's slides, the importance of Indigenous people and their technology traditional knowledge along with scientific knowledge. So yes, thanks for the question, Salvatore. Happy Oceans Day.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Paula, I very much like the way that you described the technology transfer, the transfer of marine technology, because when you hear technology transfer, you really think about the transfer of equipment, which was part of your explanation. But you also mentioned knowledge, training, opportunities. So do you think countries are already now collaborating? Because you also said it's important also for developed countries to really operationalize this notion of technology transfer. Do you link that with this as a sustainable blue economy? Do you link that with conservation? What are the main application areas that technology transfer may lead us to?
Thank you, Salvatore. Yes, indeed. We have to look at the transfer of marine technology beyond the equipments, beyond the machines. The people are important, the institutions are important, the capacities of these people are important. As Tamara said a while back, not only the scientific knowledge, but also the traditional knowledge. We have great foundational knowledge in our regions that has not yet been made visible. The countries are collaborating, training their own professionals, masters, PhDs, but we still need to go further into techniques and technologies. Here lies a great opportunity. I believe that the way we are going to harmonize all these systems is basically, I'm sorry, there's an interruption here. I don't know why. There's an alarm here. Through work on the topics related to the blue marine, to the marine spatial planning that will help us in our mapping systems. One of the great challenges of the decade is to have a world map of our seabeds, our seafloors, and I think that the transfer of marine technology is the backbone of these processes, involving each one of the locations, the regions, and then to escalate to the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. And if you allow me, I would like to end the session, first of all, by thanking all panelists. Panelist Yames had to leave for another webinar. I also wanted to say that there are two other messages, conclusions, findings that were put forward, but not necessarily elaborated upon, but this is really matter for further reflection and hopefully concrete actions. One, the question of gender in ocean science that Jacqueline referred to, and the other one, the youth dimension. And we really hope that with the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, both issues, both dimensions of ocean science can really be addressed further. I also wanted to say that our chat was very rich in terms of resources that are being shared with the participants. So I recommend that you look into those resources. And with that, once again, thank you, the panelists, thank you, all participants, and also the organizers of this webinar. And once again, happy World Ocean Day 2021. Thank you.
Gracias, Feliz.